And we're going to go ahead and give a brief introduction, if you don't mind, to Ms. Mason-Hogans. She is an award-winning civil rights historian, educator, and speaker, writer, and activist. She is a native of Chapel Hill, North Carolina, from 7 generations of both sides of her family. The daughter of David Mason of the Chapel Hill Nine, who began the first sit-on of Chapel Hill's civil rights movement, igniting decades of protests against segregation. Dana's acclimating TED Talk, Why the Way We Tell Stories is a Social Justice Issue, was featured on TED, where she describes the critical oral history mythology, which she uses for her podcast and Recollecting Chapel Hill. Working with community partners, school systems, university activists, and historians, she collaborates and consults to document local and national history from the inside out and from the bottom up. Thank you so much today for joining us. We will go ahead and ask Ms. Mason-Hogans to get us started. Dan, I think you're on mute still. If you don't, if you would like to, sorry, we can't hear you. Thank you.
I was just going to town, just running right in it. But I want to thank you so much, Selena, for that kind introduction. And I really want to thank those of you who've decided to join me and share space with me this morning. I really want to acknowledge Dr. Yoma Ikrua for inviting me to this conference and for being a part of the revolutionary way that we research and think about how children in equity and early childhood education. Because of scholars like her, we are receiving tools to understand what is happening with our children like never before. And I think that we need to acknowledge this movement as a pivotal point in our collective understanding. When I was preparing for our time together this morning, I thought that I might offer context by sharing with you some information about my family history and education journey, and a bit about some of our strategies towards power shifting and freedom education. So the folks that you see there are my family. And like many Black families here, I'm from Chapel Hill for 7 generations on both sides of my family, as Selena indicated. The town of Chapel Hill was built around the school system, the academic school system of UNC, and the mention of a public university at North Carolina came about in 1776. And the university started to come into fruition in 1789, making UNC the nation's oldest public university. I often contend that the plight of local Black people in Chapel Hill and at this university parallels the plight of Black people in America. And like so many other local people, when the university was being built in 1789, our ancestors, along with the Native people from this area, were here. The natives built the bricks, and we laid the foundation of this university and town along with it. And this is significant because the demographics for Chapel Hill have shifted significantly over the past few years, where non-Black or non-white population has skyrocketed to 17% of our demographics. And up until the early 90s, it was only 1%. So Black people have a special relationship with the university and town, and with marginalization and oppression. So let me share with you a little bit of that history. An escheated property is when a person dies without heirs and the state inherits the property. UNC was founded on escheated property and was unlike most public universities in this country. If you would go back to the next slide, please. Okay, thank you. If you go back like a couple of slides, if you can go back. Yes, thank you so much. Okay. So escheated property is when a person dies without heirs. And there was a big argument to the western side of the state and the eastern side of the state who wanted funding for this public university, but the eastern side of the state was very affluent and the western side of the state did not want this to become a big propaganda machine. So what happened was they decided to start the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill from escheated property. The challenge for me and many other Black families, my ancestors and other Black families, is that our ancestors were escheated property. So this means that by this process, since UNC was started in escheated property, but was the benefactor of this property, the wealth was meager in the beginning and continued to accumulate. So over the years, the contribution was colossal. And again, the challenge for us local Black generational folk is that in 1789, our ancestors were a part of the wealth that was acquired by UNC. So this means that not only was UNC built with Black blood, sweat, and tears, and we were also the economic foundation of the university. So that's how we got here. And that's where, that's what our relationship has been between power and narrative. And it's important to contextualize this history because narrative is important. And I call myself a memory worker because memory is important to the collective understanding and are the basis for narratives. Narratives shape perceptions, perceptions shape values, and values shape policies. So it is important to remember this history because this is the way that my people were perceived and therefore valued and were subject to the policies that remain with us today. So if we could go ahead 2 slides, it would be great. Thank you so much. So this is my daughter, Concave. And when it comes to early childhood education and scholars like Dr. Kura and Dr. Keisha Bentley Edwards have shown us through their research is that it is important to talk about our children's educational positioning and journey before they even get here. So we need to begin with maternal health and how systemic racism plays a part in it. According to a 2019 study from Harvard, only about 5.7% of physicians in the United States identify as Black or African Americans. Now, Black people make up 12% of the US population, so this is a problem. It's problematic for Black women because it is imperative to view this care through a lens of cultural understanding. Black women carry more racialized stress in areas such as wealth and housing discrimination. And that is important to understand when receiving medical care because Black women are more likely to receive inadequate prenatal care, according to the study, and are 3 times more likely to die in childbirth when being treated by white doctors. So this is my second born daughter, Akanke, and I have a trigger warning for you this morning. I had a high-risk pregnancy before my first child, and it was only after my first 3 miscarriages that I found out that there were 2 treatment clinics, one for medical students and one for the more seasoned doctors. And this is what the personnel shared with me. And they told me that Black and Latino parents were routinely assigned to the clinic for the students, and our care was not as thorough as the white patients. Now, this is in the year 2000. Next slide, please. So when I found this out, I advocated to be in clinic 1 and for them to re-examine their policies. But when I gave birth to my son, Akeem, I went into distress because they couldn't find my doctor. And my son, Akeem, is kissing his little baby sister on her first day of being born. But I went into distress because they couldn't find my doctor when it was time for me to give birth. So my baby was in distress and he swallowed some of my meconium fluid and almost died. He was in NICU for about 3 weeks, and my mother saved his life because she was waiting with the rest of my family in the waiting room and stepped outside. And she found my doctor walking to his car to go home. He had just delivered triplets and plumb forgot about me. Now, this is the first time that I have spoken about my care publicly, but it's important for you to know the context. And my experiences are far from uncommon. So when I found out about this desperate treatment, I began sharing experiences with other mothers and found the same consistent and similar patterns and stories from young mothers, Black and brown new mothers. And imagine if this is your first introduction to motherhood. So by the time that they do get here, Black babies have a hard time before they even reach kindergarten. There was a study out of Florida that studied 2 million hospital births from 1992 to 2015 and found that they measured infant health treatment and found that Black newborns were nearly 3 times more likely than white newborns to die when cared for by white doctors. Additionally, as you can see from the graphic, Black children are more likely to be born in poverty. And when they do receive access to early childhood education, astonishingly, they are subject to internalized cultural biases from other children and are more likely to be disciplined and expelled. So this is before they even get to school age. So next slide, please. And thank you so much for your kind words, Beth. So now that we kind of set the stage for a few of the issues that Black children face before they start school, I want to share with you some of the solutions that my family has engaged with over the past 23 years of our children and community's academic journey, and hopefully of other solutions that might help you or someone you know to establish a power shift in our children's education. So next slide, please. Thank you. So this is 1992 at the North Carolina A&T State University. I think I need an Aggie Pride somewhere in this chat. But my husband and I both started researching. We were student activists, so we started thinking at an early age, well before we even had children, about dreaming about the world that we wanted to create for our children while we were students at A&T. And we've always operated from a power framework, and early on made the decision that we would both work in education. However, one of us would work within the system and provide a consistent check for our family, and one of us would work in the community to build on the community power that existed there. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the first thing that we did when our children were in preschool was to establish a network with other Black parents and a regular cohort of social support for our family and children. So this slide is of our son at Keene and the network of his friends that have been there since pre-K. Last May, they all graduated from different colleges, and the photo on the right was from a community thank you and college send-off for his freshman year. So we had a big party before my son went to school to thank the community for all of their support. And the teacher on the far right is a teacher that we established community with. And now I am the godmother of her daughter. And the man on the right is a teacher that my son has known since pre-K. So community is very important to us. And if you could go to the next slide, please. And thank you for that Aggie Pride. and Rams too. And so this is the community of support that we established with my daughter. And so what we did was to gather a cohort of Black parents together with the understanding that our Black children were going to face challenges of perception and disparate treatment. And we wanted to have a community that made them feel good about themselves, and that we could also collectively engage with solution buildings to some of the things that our children have been through. And I'm so proud of the fact that my son graduated and still keeps in contact with friends that he's known since pre-K, and that my daughter is about to graduate from A&T in May with the young lady on her right. And she's going to graduate. They went to the same school, so they came up together and provided a show of support for each other. So we're very, very pleased with the way that we have tried to build power and sustain power in the community, because relationships is one aspect of power building. So, yes, thank you so much. So the first thing that we taught our children is that it was critical to analyze and understand the system that they came into in an age-appropriate manner, and the importance of awareness of these systems means that there's nothing wrong with them, but the system is flawed. So my job at Duke University Center for Documentary Studies offered an opportunity for them to grow up with a cohort of intergenerational freedom fighters who helped us to reinforce the freedom ethos that we wanted our children to be a part of. So on the slide on the left is Bob and Janet Moses. Bob Moses is a legendary civil rights activist who started educational programs. If you've ever heard of the Algebra Project, this is what the late, great Bob Moses established. I think Barack Obama and Jamie Raskin, who did the impeachment hearings, cited the students from the Nonviolent Coordinating Committee as one of the foundational inspirations for change in this country. So my job at Duke required us to look into those histories and really get that history correct and extend it to what that might mean for power building and power shifting, and then transfer that to our children. And again, if you look on the right, these are some of the freedom fighters of today. Jen Lawson, Phil Agnew, and Toshi Reagan, and my daughter Akanke is in the middle. And my children came up every time we went to a meeting, whether it was PTA or we had a gathering of these folks. I made sure that my children were around and understood their role in the community. So it's really important that we not, if you remember when I shared the other slide, children are always interpreting the world around them, even when they can't articulate it. So it's important that we shore up self-perceptions, but also plug into our children an understanding about power, because power is central to the way that our children are treated and our children interpret the world. So we can go to the next slide, please. So in our analysis of power, it is important that we start from that ethos. So this is from the Chapel Hill Carrboro City Schools website. And I chose that because, of course, we're from Chapel Hill Carrboro. So this is, if you go to their website, this is what you are greeted with. This is one of the panels that you're greeted with. And Chapel Hill has the second largest achievement gap between white and Black students in the nation, and the third when it comes to brown students in the nation. I think the last time we had our proficiency rate, it was around 28% of those who were deemed college ready. And we also know that an achievement gap is really an opportunity gap and a structural gap. So I believe that we have to talk about institutional power, because this is what we're greeted with when we go to the website of our schools. And I think that if we are trying to really address a problem, we have to acknowledge the problem. But power is in narrative. So when you look at the website, what do you see in this narrative? As far as I'm concerned, the first glaring sign should be, we have the second largest achievement gap in the country between Black and white students, and third between Latino and white students. I think if we cover it up and we sugarcoat things, it's very difficult for us to address it. So next slide, please. Asheville has a huge divide when it comes to opportunity, and they have made it very apparent on their landing sheet. And Asheville still has an abysmal record when it comes to serving Black students, but for the first time since they had this conference, there was a decrease in the achievement gap. So for me, it's very important to name it. And it is also important to understand that power is the narrative to tell the story that you want to tell. So it's very important to have a counter narrative in the school, in the collective community. So if you could go to the next. Building community power means that it's important to understand what parent leadership looks like and to push back on current leaderships. Understand that the PTA is a political machine. the PTA is a political power machine, and oftentimes Black and brown people are left out of these discussions and left out of that machine. When my children were in school in Durham, North Carolina, the district was overwhelmingly Black and brown, and the PTA leadership, the parent leadership, was about 80% white. So these are not spaces that parents typically believe that they should be a part of. And I believe that it's important to engage the leadership that exists within the school, but also to build community on the outside of the system that affords a better opportunity to create and cultivate your own power. So throughout my children's journey, educational journey, I've always been a part of the PTA and the SIT team, but it's very important for us to rethink how those structures come about. And by doing that, I think that we have to contend with the fact that, that it's important to organize for policy change. I don't think that it is, I think it's really important not to be afraid to go to these all Black spaces or all Latino spaces. We have have coalition building that we need to do, and we also have issues that are unique to the demographics that we're working with, and build those power structures. And what that means is that we have to rethink what it means to build community power. And one of the things that we have to really address is the dynamic of classism, and not shaming those who have limited level of participation and inviting them into the community. We need to recognize diverse contributions of what people can bring. In our cohort, this is from when my children were in high school, there were several members of the community that were part of the organization, and they contributed in different ways. So the first thing that we did when we got to high school was to really strengthen the PTA. We didn't have any budget, so we started doing fish fries and fundraisers. We started creating opportunity that young people could spend time with each other, feel good about their journey at the school, and we're very intentionally prioritizing the groups that have been most marginalized and really trying to make sure that we built that power. So what that looked like is there were a lot of parents who may not have been able to come to every PTA meeting, but they would contribute in another way. So perhaps somebody could bake some pies, or we had a family who received food assistance, and she would bring snacks for the meetings. We also developed a method of communication between parents. We were very mindful about the fact that there is also a digital divide, and that means that some parents don't have access to computers. If you look at a lot of the current PTA power structure, they're very, very dependent on websites and organizational things that really require a lot of data. So it just means rethinking that even though a lot of Black and brown families do not have access to computers, most do cell phones. So we developed a way to make sure that we had a communication system where they could talk about the issues that were impacting them and their families, and we could also respond in real time. So if they were not able to be there physically at the PTA meeting, there was still a way that they could engage their voices to be heard. And that just means bringing what you can. What can you bring? Oftentimes, because this is a generational thing, the parents with the loudest voice or the parents with degrees, those are folks that are listened to. When the truth of the matter is, from a freedom ethos, it is the people who are most marginalized whose voices we need when we talk about power sharing and switching that dynamic. So thinking about and rethinking about the way that we engage the community is critical to that, and recognizing diverse contributions to what those gatherings look like. So we had another parent who could not be there at the meetings because she was a driver, an Uber driver. And so what she would do is make sure that she would serve as a carpool agent for other parents to get them there, or maybe get their children there. I never had a meeting in the community where we don't offer childcare. We understand that some people need to, in order to come to the meeting, this is meal time. So we try very hard to make sure that there are things to eat, just being very mindful of the ways in which we engage. Next slide, please. So I have an organization, a nonprofit organization called Bridging the Gap. And it is based off of the premise that for 77% of our existence in this town, Black people have been locked out of the education that they should have inherited for building up the town and also the UNC. And remember, Chapel Hill has the second largest achievement gap and opportunity gap in the nation and is a very affluent community. So bottom line is we should be doing better by our children. So I have been advocating for additional targeted, I think they call it targeted universalism, this approach to give the descendants of the enslaved specific educational wraparound services. And I believe that UNC should be happy to give them a full ride academic scholarship after they finish with these additional services that they deserve. I've been to town council meetings. I actually won this big thing called the Big Bold Idea, where people could submit ideas to the town for ways to improve the town. And I was like, I have a way to improve it. We need to have a separate education system. And it's important for it to have autonomy, because whenever we tried to engage as a part of the system, there were a lot of barriers to engaging in a way that we felt were most beneficial for our children. In terms of, so for instance, we couldn't explicitly say we're trying to help out Black and Latino students because that was against systemic rules. They wanted us to use their teachers. We already had educators that had about 150 years of educational experience. And our problem has never been that we were not experienced. Our problem has been that we have not had the resources. So after really trying to engage them, I came up with this nonprofit called Bridging the Gap. And you can feel free to go on the website and really explain the historical connection between UNC and the town. And also on the website, I presented an outline, an educational outline that showed explicitly how for 77% of our existence in this town, we have been beset with policies that did not benefit us, beset with programs that excluded us. And it's a very, very clear line all the way up until now, how Black people have been locked out of the positioning. So I do think that we need a special targeted approach. And so because the school system was not able to come together and offer this legally, after a while, we decided to build community together and come up with our own nonprofit. And thank you, Lisa. The address is bridgingthegapwithdmh.com. And I'll put it in the chat a little later. But I think it's important to talk about that power, because if we are always chasing institutional power, it's difficult to build our own power. So local history is central to understanding where we have been and the trajectory of where we need to go. It is astonishing to me that in our school system, when we have these leadership boards or we have these advisory boards, that local generational people are locked out of the conversation. Now, I come from a movement family. Thank you. I come from a movement family. And that means that my mother was one of the first Black PTA parents since the schools were desegregated. I went to kindergarten in 1972, and my mom took me to every meeting. And I watched her advocate not only for me, but other Black children in the district. And I saw her struggle and I saw her succeed. And it's really important that your children, our children, saw us move in this manner to advocate not only for our family, but for all of the families. But also, it is important to have that historical record and understanding. So folks who may have been here for 10 years, have a difficult time digesting the history of what happened to that place because we don't have those community connections. So it's really important to build in a historical component because the community holds memory. Next slide, please. It's also important for us to create opportunities for discussion. So we have, I'm also on the Chancellor's History, Race, and Way Forward Commission at UNC Chapel Hill. And part of our advocacy is to look at the institution of slavery and how it has affected us in the community. And I can think of no better way for us to learn about this history together, because of course there's a big reparations movement in Chapel Hill. But what I have learned by working with faith-based organizations, I work with politicians, police officers, I work with the whole community to really try to understand this history. And what I have found is that people were really unclear about the concept of reparations, which is a federal program and not a local program. So we designed 4 book sessions for the community. And we got the UNC to pay for 100 books to distribute for free out into the community and designed 4 book sessions. So the first session talked about a federal reparations program. The 2 in the middle talk about this local history and what this has meant. And then the last, we will have the authors Sandy and Kirsten rejoin us from the first session to put us all together to talk about reparative programming that we need to have. So the program that I have with Bridging the Gap is a reparative program and not a reparations program. And it's distinct and it's important because Chapel Hill does have enough affluence, in my view, to have reparative programs, but it's not a reparations program. But the powerful thing about this gathering is that
it was like y'all, everybody started yelling and running and stuff, and I was just looking around.
So, I love when stuff like that happens. Please don't worry about it. Please
Sorry
don't.
about that.
Not at all. Not at all. So the important thing about the way that we structured,
Ms. Gray, if you could just go ahead and mute yourself. Thank you so much.
The important thing about the way that we structured these conversations is that we reached out to faith-based community, white faith-based communities and Black faith-based communities. And we asked them not to take advantage of the free books, but instead to support the local bookstore that we have in Chapel Hill, which is called Flyleaf Books, and purchasing a copy from the local bookstore. And if they could afford it, purchasing an additional copy for somebody in the community who might have a difficult time. And so we had over 100 people. We had mayors from Chapel Hill, Carrboro, and Hillsborough sit in on this discussion along with policymakers, faith-based people, all who are trying to do reparative work to come up with a collective community understanding about what this concept was. So next slide, please. I would have shown you the article that is referenced here in the News and Observer, but they have a paywall, and I'm just like so through with news organizations that make you pay for information. I just clipped off the Google, the Google thing that I did. But in Chapel Hill, we have recently had an attack against our superintendent that I believe is very deeply rooted in racism. And we also in Orange County just had another attack on a Black woman superintendent. I think we're in a time now that we need to understand and rethink the way that people in leadership are supported, particularly Black women who come in with a heart to change, but not necessarily the backup. So it's important for us to critique, of course, any leader that represents our school, but make sure that we understand that just because you have a person who is in charge, they are still beholden to a system. So again, we have to analyze this power structure. I understand this because my husband is a principal in Durham. And so I understand that there are certain power structures that you have to be beholden to. And I think that we have kind of gotten into this habit of critiquing our leaders without reflecting on the support that they need to advance policies and recognize those policies when they're working. So I happen to be a huge fan of Dr. Hamlet. and organized along with some other women in the community, and there were men too, excuse me, other people in the community to support this Black woman as she tried to make policy change for her children. Because what happens is that in engaging in this work, we often come up to walls and we need support. So it's really important to support the educators who are supporting our children. They are not the enemy, the system is. And history is important. So my way of supporting Dr. Hamlet was to talk about other Black superintendents in Chapel Hill and what their trajectory has been and how they have also been subject to unfair treatment. So it's important to talk about that too. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what we do when we get together as community is very, very important for us to always be mindful about the rest of the community and think about those of us who are more marginalized and assess some of the needs in the community, and then offer feedback. From that feedback, design programs that we can support ourselves. It's important for young people to see that they do have power to change some of the things that are around them. It's important for us to realize and stay connected as a community that we need to surface some of the issues that we have in the community, and that we pull from the power base that we created to delve into some of these solutions. So collective community action is paramount to freedom organizing. Next slide, please. We talked a little bit about classism and opportunity hoarding. And so we're being very mindful when our children were coming up that, and you see that the two of the guys that my son came up with, every time we had an opportunity or found out a particular camp, it's important to understand that oppression breeds competition. So there's never been an opportunity that I have come across that I have not shared with the rest of the community, even if they were things that were traditionally more competitive, like scholarship opportunities or opportunities to participate in a particular program, and advocate for those other children whose parents may not have heard about this opportunity. Because of the decisions my husband and I made, I felt a special responsibility to advocate for children to disseminate information in the ways that we talked about. And whenever there was an opportunity, there was a pilot. He was like, he wasn't a Tuskegee Airman, but he was like one of the first Black pilots. He was very, and he's from Durham. And he reached out and said that there was an opportunity for him to show young students some flight stuff. So whenever something happened like that, I would put out the call for everybody to see who could take advantage of it. But oftentimes what we do is opportunity hoard. So if there is, something come up, we are typically very afraid that our child won't be able to participate. And so we might not tell each other about events that would come up. And so this is something that we were very, very mindful of, opportunity hoarding. And recreating the classist systems that really very much parallel racist systems. We also created opportunities for our children to speak out. This is my daughter on the left with the braids. And they were advocating for education for their schools and educational funding. These were student-led and student-organized events so that they could take advantage of some of the things that were going on in their school and advocate for things that they thought young people were important to them. So it was very important for us to support this. And Regina said, really like the concept of giving a hand up rather than being a crab in a basket. Yep, we got a lot of crabs, yeah, we got a lot of crabs, but a hand up is good. Also, creating community standards. One of the things that we did at the college, and I'm something on a cricket. So we made these little aprons for the young women in school, and we thought about ways that we could welcome new freshmen, and we came up with this freshman breakfast concept. And the young people came up with this and were central to the planning and organizing. But we also made it a consistent thing so that the upperclassmen would feel a sense of responsibility for welcoming the younger classmen into their community. I can't underscore enough how this was a different PTA. This was a community centric PTA that extended beyond just the parents. We have grandparents, we have aunts, uncles, community members who were all deeply engaged in what we did at the community, at the PTA. And it was very important for us to instill in our young people that we need to continue this cycle. Next, please. So because we know that learning loss takes place in the summer, one of the things that I was committed to doing was finding summer experiences for our children at school to take advantage of. And if they didn't have a lot of summer experiences, we created our own. So what you see are, and sometimes, you know, I'm a curriculum person. I have a master's degree in curriculum and instruction. And so I would design summer curriculum for our children that reinforce some of the things that they were learning in school, but also, again, with this freedom-based ethos, helping them to understand the world around them and how they can advocate and deeply root themselves in power. So I think I shared with you, I work with the Center for Documentary Studies, and one of the summer projects that I involved my children in was to create their own documentary. Now, when they were young, they had their own TV show. I tried to get a little clip for you, but I couldn't find it. But they were maybe about 7 and 8 years old, and they had their own TV show because the local community, public community station would allow you to rent out equipment. And so they designed their own TV show, and they were, it was called the Aki Yanke Show. The Aki Yanke Show. Yes, and I will definitely put my email information in the chat. And with the show, at an early age, we were trying to get them into production, but we were also still underscoring that community component. So it was, they did interviews with Black elected officials like Bill Bell was one, cultural icons like Mama Dip from Mama Dip's Kitchen. They would do interviews, they would do book club readings, they would have a craft section, and I involved my daughter. She had the craft section, and I would involve her with coming up with crafts that did not cost, that were low cost. And so this was our way of connecting with the community as well, with this local TV show that we created. There was book club information. There were STEM projects. You know, my son had like a little science section that he would talk about the properties of science, but we were all very mindful about the cost not being prohibitive and the dissemination of this, another way of looking about how to disseminate information. Next slide, please. So this is Floyd McKissick Jr. And this was a documentary that my children were a part of. And it was important for them to meet Floyd McKissick Jr. because his father was one of the people who advocated and was the attorney for my father when he did an action when he was their age. And so they're 17 years old in that photo. And my father was 17 when he and 8 other young people did an action in Chapel Hill for the Chapel Hill 9. So it was a special moment, and it was especially important to connect that history, those historical pieces. Next slide, please. So what my husband and I would do during the summer is do, I'm probably not as good now, but I used to be pretty good in test preparations. And so we would hold sessions for children in the community. not just at our school, but all over the community about ACT and SAT test prep. We know that our children have a difficult time sometimes with those standardized tests, and we would frame it from a power-based structure and let children understand that because of the way the system is structured, this is not an assessment of your intelligence, and other people have access to funding and training to get into these classes to teach them how to do well on these tests. And so the focus of our gatherings were to teach test-taking strategies instead of content knowledge. And we created videos that we still use today to teach children who may not have been exposed to it how to take the test. But we would frame it as the hustle that it is, because we know that the SAT, we know that the origins with the SAT and a lot of these college test preps were rooted in exclusion, and it was important for our children to know that, and then know, but if you want to go to college, unfortunately, this is some of the stuff that you have to do. So we were committed to sharing what we knew for best practices, and we still do that today. Next slide, please. In this picture is me, my daughter, and my mom. And it's really important. As I said, my mom was an education activist. I'm an education activist. And my daughter is headed that way too. But it's important for us to challenge systemic oppression together. And so this is one of the marches that we went to. Next slide, please. Then after we root our children in the concept of being powerful, defining your own power, what we would do is give our children opportunities and challenges to create their own. So there was a young documentary film producer that had a film, and was called Millennials of the Moral Movement. And Millennials of the Moral Movement examined young people that were making change in their areas, like all over the place. And so this was a few years back when my daughter was in high school, and she had the responsibility of organizing a gathering, a film showing for a few years back. And what I did not know, which I was really pleased that she did not allow me to help her. She organized the whole thing. And she also invited other youth groups to it. She probably had about 250 people. She organized the food, the structure, and everything. And she invited Pierce Freelon at that time was running for mayor. And so she had like this kind of forum where people could ask them questions, not only about their activism, but what their aspirations were for leadership. And so it was kind of scary for her to do this on her own, but I think providing us with the opportunity to be responsive to the community and build on that is really important. Next, please. We had this one t-shirt person. I was good for going to community folks and asking them for opportunities. So a lot of times when we had summer programs, we have additional programs. Most of them have built in some type of component where they can help young people who may not be able to afford. And I would always push the button, push it further and say, you know, we have about 5 young people. Do you think you can make some room for us? We would always advocate for them to be more inclusive. And we would also partner with Black businesses in town who typically really support young people. So there was not an opportunity to have a mock trial team. And what we know from Dr. Cruz and other research is that one of the ways that we display Black genius is through oratory competitions or oratory skill development. So we decided to start a mock trial team. And of course, we wanted young people to have swag. So we connected with a local t-shirt person who designed the t-shirts for us and gave it to us at cost. And we were always looking for opportunities like this that young people could display their talent and feel really good about themselves. So this is what we made sure that was consistent. We had a mock trial team in middle school, the first of its kind. We created that and killed them on the state level competition. We partnered with some of the students over at NCCU who coached our children. And I think they came in second on the state level. So it was something, it's always important for us to establish what we are good at and promote that and make sure that we celebrate that, even though the systems that are in place don't necessarily think about how to do that all the time. Next slide, please. And, you know, celebrate Black geniuses. I would make up opportunities with, whether it was like talent shows, where oratory contests, whatever it was, make up, and everybody would win something. Everybody would be acknowledged in the way that they can contribute, because there's so many things in this world that our children have to engage to tell us that what they can't do. Is really important to counter that with celebrating what they really are good at and acknowledging them for that confidence boost. Okay, thank you. Next slide. And we have to set expectations of continuation. So in the slide on the left, we have Cornell Watson. Cornell Watson is probably one of the top 5 Black photographers on the scene right now. And behind him are images from UNC Chapel Hill. And he had his exhibit right now is at the National Civil Rights Museum. We went to Memphis a couple of weeks ago to encourage him and to tell him how proud we were of his work. But Cornell took time out to train these young people in the room to become docents for his work, which means that he explained the history of the photos in the Chapel Hill area. He took time with them. We asked Cornell if you could just come spend an hour with our kids. Cornell ended up spending the whole day with them. And he came back for the summer. I worked with a young group of scholars called the James Cate Scholars. Cornell came back from the summer and also designed programs. And there was just something about the way he moved, with his patience with young people, his intentionality to highlight and really elevate their work. We had people who said that they liked taking pictures before Cornell came, and then after his visit, they would call themselves photojournalists. And so encouraging that was so important. And I found out later that Cornell was trained by Bob Moses, in his algebra project, which was one of the initial slides that I showed you. And we have expectations that our children continue in this process that we have set for them. So the first thing that my daughter did, and my son, I don't know if you're able to play the video or not. It's okay if you can't play it. Okay. So both of our children received, that's my son Akeem, they received full ride academic scholarships to A&T, and that's my daughter Conke. They were a part of a cohort called the Cheatham White Scholars. The Cheatham White Scholars are akin to the Moorhead Scholars. And the first thing that she did as a freshman is to engage other scholars and come back to Chapel Hill and come up with her own ACT, SAT prep session for students in Chapel Hill that we established a long time ago. And now she's about to graduate from A&T, but she has science programs for young Black women in the Greensboro communities and is building community there. And she's also doing test prep. And so the photo in the lower middle column is with the group of scholars that we called, like I shared with you, the James Cate Scholars. So you see my son and my daughter in that photo, and my son is finished with school. He graduated last May, and my daughter arranged, whose major is chemical engineering. She designed a STEM program component for Bridging the Gap to come and show young kids about STEM and how they might be able to navigate STEM. So you have my mom, education activist, me, education activist. My daughter got a really lucrative job after she graduated from A&T, and she made us so joyous and horrified at the same time when she announced that she had turned down that job, so now she can become an educator. And so we're really happy that she's continuing it. And we, you know, with the way that they are treating Black teachers, we don't want her to we definitely don't want her to become discouraged, but we know that's a part of her trajectory.
Excellent. And thank you for sharing this as a model for folks across the state too. It's wonderful to see all the comments too about how powerful this was.
It is. Thank you. And thank y'all again.
This was a great turnout today. Thank you again for everyone for joining us today, and have a great rest of the conference.